In this tutorial, we'll be creating this audio reactive animation in Blender using my free Blender extension, Simple Audio Visualizer, to animate objects based on audio data. Then we'll be combining this with a lightweight geometry node simulation setup, which allows us to create this powerful time displacement effect. And for this tutorial, we have access to a really big music library, because this video is sponsored by Epidemic Sound. Okay, so here we are in Blender version 4.5 beta, and the first thing I want to do is to import an audio file. So let's bring up our timeline here, and let's right click on this line and do a horizontal split. Let's bring it back down again, and then let's set this new editor type to video sequencer, and then you can go Shift A, Sound, and then you just find your audio file. So let's do this one, for example, Breeze by Basics on Epidemic Sound, add sound strip, and now when you press play, you can hear the audio file. So I want to turn this into a frequency band audio visualizer, and that is super easy to do with my new extension, and it's completely free. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, and you go to Get Extensions, the first time you need to click Allow Online Access, and then you just search for Simple Audio Visualizer, there it is, and then you just click Install. And that's it, you don't need to go to any website or anything, it's just in the extension platform. Super handy. So let's close this, and then let's split our viewport in half here, by clicking up here and dragging like this. And then let's set this editor type to Graph Editor. And make sure you have enough room so you can see this side panel here. And there you can see you have the Simple Audio Visualizer. So this extension takes an audio file and you set the multiplier, and then you can choose whether you want to generate new objects or if you want to animate selected objects. So let's generate some new objects first. Let's simply delete all the objects in our scene. And let's select the same audio file by clicking this folder icon. Go to Desktop and let's take the same audio file. And then let's, for example, set the number of cubes to 8 cubes. And then let's click Create Visualizer. And look at that. Now when you press play, you can see that we have an audio visualizer here. And if you think these are too animated, they're going too high up, you can simply delete them and set the multiplier to 0.2, for example, and then create another visualizer like that. And look at that. Now we have this cute little audio visualizer in our scene. Super easy to use. And then you can also do this mirror mode, which basically just offsets the origin. So it kind of creates this mirror effect, which is just a little bit different. And what's so cool about this is that these objects are just regular 3D objects. So you can take all these keyframes here and you can press G and Y and move them up, for example, or you can scale things up and down, or you can even go into edit mode and move these up, and you can really change how this is looking. Look at that. But the most powerful part of this add-on is when you're animating selected objects. So let's delete this and let's add, for example, a monkey. So let's go Shift A, Mesh Monkey. And let's just make this smoother. And now I want this to rotate. So let's press R and let's see Z, Y, yeah, X. I want this to rotate on the X-axis. So let's specify rotation X and let's get rid of scale and Z. So that means that if we take this monkey now, you can visualize it like this, and now when you press play, it's kind of headbanging like that. Pretty cool. But what's so cool about this is that if you duplicate this monkey, so let's make like a pyramid like this, and you take all of these and then you visualize them, if you wait for a second, it will map the lowest frequency from here, and then it will take the frequency and map it in between all these monkeys. So that means that now when you press play, these monkeys will be headbanging with different frequencies. Look at that. That's just so cool. So this is such a powerful way to visualize music. And let me show you something else. If you add a cube, for example, and you scale it up on the Z-axis, scale it down a little bit, and now if I want to rotate it on the X-axis, but I want the rotation to continue, you can click Additive here. And if I make some copies of this, and then you simply visualize these again, you wait for a little bit, and look at this. That is such a cool effect, because now these are rotating additively. That is such a nice way to just show how the music looks like. Oh, and one more example. If you use a torus, for example, you can scale it on all axes except for the Z-axis. So we want to scale them like this. So you can, for example, take one here and duplicate it. So you have 6 of them. and then you just visualize this one. And now they all disappear because they have a scale of 0. But if you press play, you can scale this up like this. You can also set the transform pivot point to 2D cursor and scale it based on that. And it's so cool that you can manipulate this in real time. Look at that. Okay, I want to try a different song now, and since Epidemic Sound has given me full access to their library, we have a ton of music we can use for this audio visualizer project. So this is Epidemic Sound. I've been using this a lot recently, so let me show you some of the features I'm really excited about. So first of all, this is a huge music library. I think it's 50,000 songs and over 200,000 sound effects. And I made myself a little bit of a playlist here. So you can hear I'm really into these rhythms, for example, or this drums like this. And I also like this curious type of music. So the way this platform works is basically that you safe list your account. You can basically make your YouTube channel or your Instagram page available to post this music on. So it's kind of cleared for copyright. So that means that with a subscription, any of the songs on this platform, you can just click download and then you can use them in your videos. Oh, here's a really cool feature. Listen to this. So here we have this chill song, right? But it's way too long, so I want to make this shorter. So you can go to create versions, and it basically scans the entire song, and by default it sets to 30 seconds. And then it puts all these invisible cuts here. So if I listen to this one, for example, now you can see here's an invisible cut. Listen to this. Super nice. You basically get these super seamless, shorter versions of the song. And then pretty much every song on this platform has stems. So for example, if you take this one, you can open up the stems here. Let's say you think the drums are a little bit too loud. You can just lower them like this. Or you can solo the bass. Every song is basically sliced up to these different parts. And I recommend that you check out the genres. Here you can see there are so many different genres here, so many different types of music. For example, if you go to electronic, you can see all this. You even have psytrance or psychedelic trance. Oh, this song, I think, yeah, this one has a crazy drop. Listen to this. So yeah, big thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this video. You can sign up for a free trial today. There's a link in the description if you want to learn more. Okay, so the track I've selected for today's project is called Go Off by Flyin'. It's a really upbeat and cool song, I think. So I'm going to download the full mix in wave quality. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. Okay, so here we are back in Blender. And I'm going to delete this old stuff, so it gets rid of this old sound file. And let's get rid of all this other stuff here. And then let's go to the first frame and let's go Shift-A, Sound. And let's find this new one, Go Off by Flyin'. Let's click Add Sound Strip. And this is very important. We also need to add the sound strip in the add-on as well. So let's click this folder icon and let's set it to be the same song. And now I think this song is a little bit longer, or we want to use a longer part of it. So let's just fast forward here. Let's extend our frame range by just clicking and dragging this. Yeah, we want to stop it right here maybe, I think. Okay, so now I want to generate new objects. I'm going to disable mirror mode, and I think 8 cubes is actually great. So let's just click Create Visualizer, and we wait for a second, and there we go. And you should know that the longer the frame range and the more the objects you have, the longer it's going to take every time you click Create Visualizer or Visualize Selected Objects. So now let's have a look at this. Okay, nice. I have an idea for this. I want to create an effect where we have kind of like a mirror mode, but not completely. So if we select all these objects and we zoom in here, press A to select all the keyframes. If you press G and Y, we can move them up a little bit. If you set the pivot point to 2D cursor, you can press S and Y and scale them up a little bit as well. Maybe pull it down a little bit. Okay, that's good. And now what I want to do is I want to go to the first frame and I want to select all of them, press Tab to go to edit mode. Then if you view this from the front here, you can press G and then Z to move them down a little bit. So for example, maybe here, just like 2/3. So you have like 3 parts and we're like 2/3 like this, because that means that now it will be offset a little bit. So now we have kind of like a mirror effect, but it's more up here and then less down here. I think that's a cool effect to make it a little bit more asymmetrical. Okay, and then this is so cool. Since this is a regular object, we can move these around and we can even duplicate them since they only have keyframes on the scale Z-axis. So let's press A to select all of them and let's view this from the front and let's press Shift D And then let's move it down here a little bit. And I want to press R and then type 120. So now we are rotating it 120 degrees. And then we can duplicate it once more, move it over here, and then rotate this one 120 as well. So now we have this triangle, which looks kind of symmetrical and interesting, I think. So look at this. Now when you press play, this is still an audio visualizer, but it's a triangle instead. Look at this when the bass hits here. Yeah, that's a really cool effect. Okay, so now that we have this shape, I want to do something really cool using geometry nodes. Every frame, I want this to be duplicated and offset by one frame. So that's going to create like a really interesting ripple effect that kind of travels through time like this. So now we have all these cubes, they're in the same collection, so you can collapse this. And let's rename this collection to just cubes. And then if you hold your mouse up here, you can press C, and let's make a new collection, and let's call this GeoNodes. So now you can press 1 to see the cubes collection, and you can press 2 on your keyboard to see the GeoNodes collection. So it's a really fast way to just swap between these two. So for our geometry nodes object, we can create a mesh object. So let's go Shift A, mesh cube, for example. And then let's press F2 and let's rename this to GeoNodes. Okay, I don't think we need to see the audio waveform all the time. So let's change this to be the geometry node setup. So let's set this editor type to geometry node editor. And to make a new geometry node system, let's click this button here that says new. And then also we want to pin this. So if we click away, this will still be the geometry node setup. Okay, so let's remove this. So now here you can see we have our group input, which is this cube. We don't need that, so we can press X to delete it. And now we want to take this cubes collection here, and let's just click and drag it into the geometry node system. So now if you connect the collection info here with the group output, look at that. Now we have all these audio visualizer cubes as one single object. And it's even animated as well. So that means we can use geometry nodes to really manipulate this. Let's make some more room here. Okay, so for this geometry node setup, we are going to create a duplicated version that contains information about the previous frame. So to do this, we can use the simulation nodes. So to add a simulation zone here, we can simply hold our mouse here and press Shift A and just search for simulation. So now we have a simulation zone here. We can connect our collection like this, and then we connect the output into the group output. So now we have a simulation zone where we can add nodes inside of here, and they will be repeated every frame. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, we want to make sure our object is being duplicated every frame. So inside our simulation zone, we're going to go Shift A and let's search for join, and let's click join geometry. So every frame, we want to duplicate our original collection with itself inside of this simulation zone. So let's take our collection info from outside the simulation zone and let's connect it to the join geometry, which is inside the simulation zone. So now when you press play, you can see that we're duplicating this every frame. And I'm actually going to disable the playback of the sound because we don't need to listen to this right now. So let's click playback and let's just disable play audio. But now the problem is we are duplicating this in the same spot all the time. We want this to move like this every frame. So the way we can do this is that we can add a transform geometry node inside the simulation zone, because then it will happen every frame. So let's go Shift A and let's search for transform geometry. And let's place this inside of here. And let's go to the first frame. And now we can, for example, translate it on the x-axis. So let's just click and drag. And let's do -1 meter, for example. So now when you press play, you can see that this is being duplicated every frame. That is such a cool effect. But you can notice that this is lagging quite a lot. It's just creating more and more objects to our scene. So eventually it's just going to take such a long time to simulate this. So let's say we wanted to stop here, for example. We only want the simulation to continue until it's reached this point. The way we can do this is that we can delete these objects based on their age. So let's make some more room here. And let's go Shift A and let's search for delete geometry. I want to place it here. And right away, this deletes all of our geometry. And that's because we can specify with the selection what geometry we want to delete. Remember, we want to delete the oldest cubes. So let's extract some data about the age of these cubes so we can delete the oldest one. So let's go Shift A and let's search for store named attribute. And we're going to create an attribute called age, like this. And now let's bring back this attribute by going Shift A and let's search for read named attribute. And then let's bring back the age here. And now if you connect these two, the trick here is to just use an add node and you set it to 1. So every frame we are adding 1 to this age value. And now we can use this data here to specify the selection of our delete geometry node. So let's take this named attribute here and let's connect it to the selection, but nothing happens. And that's because we need to find the difference between these two. So let's go Shift A and let's add a compare node. And now let's set this to integer, so we have whole numbers. And then you place it in the middle here. And that's it. Now this number in the compare node, or this greater than node, if you set this to 5, for example, now we will have 5 versions of this. Look at that. Super simple node setup to just delete geometry like that. So let me just clean this up a little bit so you can take a screenshot. Yeah, so here's the basic node setup that allows this to work. Because if you increase this to 20, for example, and you press play, now you can see that we have 20 versions of our audio visualizer going through time. And this is such a cool effect. Look at that. And now this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because now that we have this lightweight setup with only 20 versions of our audio visualizers, we can press play and we can manipulate the transform geometry node in real time. Look at this. If we change the rotation, for example, it's behaving like a fluid simulation almost. Really cool. It's kind of like a soft body simulation, but it's an audio visualizer. It's kind of cool. But you might be noticing that this rotation is happening around a weird pivot point. So to fix this, we can simply go back to the first collection here by pressing 1 in the 3D viewport. And then let's press A to select all the cubes. And let's view this from the front by pressing X on this gizmo. And you can press G and you can just place this in the center here. Doesn't need to be perfect, just place it roughly in the center. So now if you press 2 and go back to the geometry nodes, you need to go back to the beginning again. Now if you press play, you can rotate it and it's rotating around itself kind of. Such a cool effect, look at that. Okay, but now I'm going to show you something really cool. Instead of tweaking this rotation values like this, that is kind of difficult to do, especially once you start animating it. It's going to be quite cumbersome. So I'm going to show you how you can use an object in the 3D viewport to control this. And it's super simple to do. So let's just set these values to 0. And then let's go Shift A and let's go empty. And let's do a cube, for example. And then I'm going to press F2 and I'm going to call this GeoNodes controller. And then here in the outliner, you can take this controller and you can pull it into the geometry node system. And now we have an object info node that is pointing to this empty object. And this is so cool. If we take our location here and plug it into the translation, we take the rotation, plug it into rotation, scale into scale. Now we have effectively made a parent between this object info that is controlling this transform geometry node that is inside the simulation zone. And this is just so powerful. Because now if you take this GeoNodes controller here, if you like, you can right click and make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Let's go to the first frame. And now if you press space, you'll notice that we have the same issue from before where everything is being duplicated in the same place. But here's what you can do. You can simply move it on the x-axis. So if you go to the first frame, press space and then G, you can press X. Look at that. Now we are recreating the same animation, but we are controlling an empty object. So we can rotate this on the different axes. And it's such a cool effect. Look at this delay that is happening here. It's really cool. So now depending on how powerful of a computer you have, you can increase this greater than node. Let's set to 50, for example. Yeah, it starts to lag quite quickly, I think. But what I think is really cool is to scale this. So if you scale it, for example, up, it will always just keep growing, which looks insane. Look at that, that's how trippy that is. Or if you scale it on only one axis, for example, the y-axis and the z-axis, it kind of becomes tiny, but it keeps its length. And then you can rotate it as well. That's crazy. I think my favorite is when it's twisting like this. That is a really cool effect. I think I want something that goes back and forth like this. That just feels so organic. Yeah, so let's add some keyframes to that. I want to animate it rotating on the x-axis like this. So with the GeoNodes controller selected, you can go to the object properties and you can go to the X rotation and you can right click insert single keyframe. And maybe let's go to frame 100 and let's give it some rotation, maybe 5 degrees. And then let's right click and press insert single keyframe again. So now we can see here to the right in the graph editor that now we have a keyframe for a rotation like that. It's like a slow rotation. And I think, yeah, frame 100, yeah, let's duplicate this. So Shift D and just type 200. So it kind of goes back and forth. And then you can press A to select all of them, Shift E, and you can go make cyclic. So now this will just go back and forth all the time. I think that's kind of cool. Oh wait, it's only going back, not back and forth. Yeah, let's take these bottom keyframes here. Let's box select this and let's press G and Y and let's type -5. So now it should go kind of like back and forth every 100 frame. Look at how crazy that looks from the front. It's like a monster of... Oh, that's so cool. I think I want to tighten the gap in between these cubes here. So let's go back to the cubes collection by pressing 1. And let's set our transform pivot point to individual origins. First select one of them and then press A to select the rest of the cubes. And then let's press Tab to go to edit mode, A to select everything. And now we can scale this up a little bit. So maybe like this. And then let's press Tab to go back to object mode. And now I think I want to make a little bit more room here and here. Okay, so now let's have a look at this. Yeah, that looks a little bit tighter. I like that. Okay, so let's go back to our geometry nodes collection. Oh, that feels really good. Oh, is that too crazy? I think it might be too much overlap. Yeah, let's go back to our cubes collection by pressing 1. And let's press A to select all the cubes. Make sure one of the cubes are highlighted, by the way. You can hold on Shift and select it so it looks highlighted like this. And then you can press A to select all the keyframes. And then I think, yeah, let's go to where it's really taking off. Maybe here. Yeah, and then let's scale it down on the y-axis. So maybe there. Yeah, that's good. Okay, look at this. Here you can see we have these artifacts, right? These are happening because the faces here have the exact same location. So really easy way to fix this is to simply select these ones, for example, and we can just move it a little bit on the x-axis. So let's press G and X. Let's just nudge it a little bit behind like this. So now we have this overlap instead, and we're getting rid of that artifact. Yeah, let's do the same thing over here, but maybe we'll move it in front. So G and X and just a little bit like that. Okay, nice. Let's try and add some lighting to this. So I'm going to take this editor type here and set it to 3D viewport as well. And then let's just get rid of this and this. And then let's go Shift A, light, area light. And I want to press G and Z and move this up. And by the way, when we're adding new objects to our scene, it's very important that they're placed in the geometry nodes collection. Do not place anything else in this cube collection because things will get very weird very quickly. So now we have our area light and we can hold down middle mouse button and scroll on this editor type here. And let's set this to rendered view. And I'm using the Cycles render engine, by the way. You can go to Edit, Preferences, System, and enable whatever fits your GPU if you want to use a dedicated GPU. So let's take our area light here, right click, and let's increase the light size. We can right click, increase light power. I want to move this up and away a little bit. Look at all these details. That just feels... This just feels really good. I love this diffuse look, kind of. Okay, let's go to our world properties here. And let's change the background strength to 0. Oh, nice. So now we can take our light here. We can right click, increase the power. Make it a little bit brighter. That looks so cool. It's like a dragon of some sort. Oh, and by the way, you see this? There's this glitch at the beginning here. This can be various reasons, but what I've found to be the easiest way to fix this is to simply let the animation play a little bit before the music starts. So the way we can do this is we can offset both the animation and the music. So let's head over to the first collection, the cubes collection. And if you press play here, now you can see the animation starts on the first frame, right? So if we set this editor type back to graph editor, let's press A to select all the cubes and hold down Shift and select one of them so they're highlighted like this. And then let's zoom out here and let's press A to select all the keyframes. And then you can press G and then 60, for example. So now we've offset all the keyframes of the song by 60 frames. And now it's also very important that we go over to the video sequencer and we select our audio file and we press G and 60 here as well. So now if we enable music playback, we can see that nothing happens for 60 frames, and then it starts. So if we go to our geometry nodes collection now by pressing 2, we can see that we have this animation starts. See that? The simulation gets to load before the music starts, which is kind of nice. Okay, let's get back to the lighting. Let's get back to the 3D viewport here. Let's set this to be rendered view. Oh, look at this, when you can see it inside here. That is phenomenal. I feel like you could take a screenshot. Like this could be like your wallpaper. That is such a cool array. But it's animated and it syncs with the music. That is so cool. Let's see if we can maybe add a ground texture. Because I want to see if we can fly through the air here. Let's go Shift A and let's go Mesh Plane. And I want to press S to scale this up. I want to scale it up quite a lot. And then press Ctrl A to apply the scale. And then let's press Tab to go to edit mode. And I want to just take these two vertices here, this one and this one. And let's just view so we can see it like this. And let's press G and X. And let's just move it really far away, like super duper far. Because we never want to run out of runway here. So let's place it like, yeah, 1,000 meters or 900 meters. That's good. And now let's move this down a little bit by pressing G and then Z. So we have it just below here. Okay, that's good. And I think I want it to be a little bit wider. So let's press Tab to go to edit mode, A to select all the vertices, and then S and Y. So it's a little bit wider like this. And then we can also select these two vertices and just pull it over here. Yeah, let's press F2 and let's call this ground texture. Okay, I want to animate this ground texture to be moving backwards like this. So let's select the ground plane and let's head over to the object properties. And then here you can see we have the X location. We want to animate this. So let's right click, insert single keyframe. And then let's go to frame 60, for example. And then let's press G and X. And let's move maybe here. Is that correct? Yeah, and then let's right click, insert single keyframe again. And now you can see, yeah, we have almost the same speed here. But we want the speed to be linear. So you can simply select the ground plane. And down here, hold your mouse down here and press A to select all the keyframes. And then press Shift E to get a linear extrapolation. So now we will have a linear keyframe on this plane. Yeah, it needs to go a little bit faster. So let's just simply select this keyframe here. Let's press G and let's move it closer. Yeah, now it seems to have the same speed. So that means that now we can add a procedural texture to this ground. Let's just go to the end there and see. No, we're not running out of ground. Yeah, okay, nice. So let's add a procedural texture to this. So let's select our ground texture and let's pull this up, make some room here. And let's set this editor type to shader editor. And I want to select the ground texture here. And let's disable this pin because it's currently pinned to something else. And then let's click new. So now we're making a new texture for the ground plane here. And I want to get rid of this principal BSDF node by pressing X. And then let's go Shift A and let's add a Voronoi texture like this. Let's go Shift A, shader, diffuse. And then you can plug the color of this one into the diffuse color. And then let's take the BSDF here into the surface. So now we have a super weird texture. This is a really colorful texture. So let's click the scale on the Voronoi texture. Let's scale this up. And you can see that the aspect ratio is completely wrong, but that's fine. We can fix that. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, and you go to Add-ons, and you can search for Node Wrangler, like this, you want to enable this add-on. Because that means you can select the Voronoi texture, you can press Ctrl-T, and now you have a texture coordinate and a mapping node. And now we can change the scale here on this mapping node. So let's take the X-axis, and let's click and drag on it. And look at that. We can change the texture of the ground here. So if you move it maybe here. Now you can see if we advance through our timeline, we have a texture that is moving just as fast as our animation. But I don't like this color pattern. I want it to be just some black and white specks here and there. So let's go Shift A and let's search for color ramp. And let's place it in the middle here. And now we can use these color stops to change what we want to see. So I only want to see these specks here. And now we can lower the scale even more. If you set the viewport shading to material preview, you're going to wait for a little bit and then you can see. Yeah, now you can see them. You can even see it with motion blur. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Okay, so let's add some reflections as well. So let's go Shift A and let's go Add Shader. And I want to go Shift A and I want to add a glossy shader to this. Now we have some reflections here. Okay, so let's add a camera to this. So I'm going to go and view it from here. And I'm going to go Shift A, camera. I want the camera to see what I'm seeing. I like this angle. So with the camera selected, let's go view, align active camera to view. And then you can press RR to kind of rotate it and hold on shift. Kind of, I think this is a good place. Oh, that is a really cool angle. Let's set this to be the camera. You can press numpad 0. Yeah, I think I want it to be a little bit more wide angle. Like that. Okay, I want the camera to start maybe here and move over like this. So let's make an empty object. So let's go Shift A, empty sphere. And I want to right click, adjust the display size, just make it really big. And then let's select the camera, hold on Shift and select the empty, and press Control P and set parent to object. So now let's rename this empty. Let's press F2 and let's call this camera controller. And again, we want to make sure that this got added to the GeoNodes collection, not the cubes collection. And then let's take this camera controller here. You can press R and X to rotate it to the side like this. And maybe even move it a little bit on the X-axis. So maybe here. Yeah, that's a cool camera movement. And also, I think it's easy to get distracted by what you can see outside the camera here. So what I like to do is to select the camera, go to the object data properties, and under viewport display, you can set the passepartout to 1. So now it's complete darkness around it instead. So now we can rotate this on the Z-axis. Look at that. Yeah, that's a very cool kind of opening shot there. So let's press K to bring up the keyframe menu, and let's insert a rotation keyframe. And I think I want to move the keyframe earlier. So let's select the keyframe here and press G, and let's maybe put it here. Yeah, so our rotation is starting here. Yeah, when the beat drops, I want to be dead center. So let's take the beat drops here. Select our camera controller. Let's press R and then Z. And let's move it to it from the front here. Like that. And then press K to insert keyframe menu, and then let's go rotation. So now our camera will kind of rotate around. Yeah, we can't preview this in render view. We'll kind of rotate around like this. Oh, and this is such a nice trick to animate the camera. Look at this camera controller here. Our camera is parented to it, right? So if you select it, and instead of rotating or moving it, we can scale it. And that will actually move the camera away really elegantly. So that means that if you want to start far away, we can, for example, press S on the camera controller and scale it up a little bit. And then let's press K and insert a scale keyframe. And then let's go to where we are in the front here. And now we can press S and bring it in a little bit, like this. So K and then scale. So now we're kind of starting far away, and then we're moving in really nicely. Yeah, okay, so one thing I want to do, I want to add a light in the middle that turns on exactly when the beat drops. So let's just bring back our video sequencer here, and let's just see when the beat drops. We can also hear it a little bit. Play audio. If we listen to this. Okay, so right here. Yeah, if we enable scrubbing, we can find the exact moment. Okay, so it's there. So if you press M to add a marker, now you can see on the timeline when the drop is. So we can disable scrubbing and playback for now. So now if we add a light that just turns on this marker, we will have a really cool effect. Okay, so let's set this back to rendered view. And let's go Shift A, light, point light. And I want to right click, adjust the light power, make it really strong. And then let's press G and X and move it inside. Oh, look at that. Look at that effect. That is so cool. And now we can also right click and increase. Yeah, let me show you. We can right click and increase the light radius. So it's a little bit of a softer light. It's not that easy to see it actually, but if we have some shadows, now they will be a little bit softer. And then we can add a color to the light. So with the light selected, go to object data properties. You can give it a color like this. So maybe something like that. And now you can see we can move this. Oh, that is a really cool effect. I want to make the light super strong. So let's right click, adjust light power. Yeah, I think that's good. I think we want to lower the area light just before the drop. So it kind of makes sense that it turns on some light in the middle there. Yeah, maybe here we can add a keyframe. So let's set this to be the graph editor. And let's select our area light. And you can go to the power here. You can click this little icon to add a keyframe. And now if we zoom out here, you can see we have a keyframe for our light. And then we go over to where the marker is. And then we can lower the strength of the light to maybe 500. Yeah, that's good. That's much more dramatic. So now let's click the animate property button again. So now we have a keyframe on the light that goes from 2500 power to 500. Okay, and then right on the drop, we want our light here in the center to turn on. So let's do the same thing here. Let's go to the frame where we want it to be turned on. Yeah, it should be here. Let's click the animate property button on the power. And then let's go maybe 2 frames earlier. And then let's set it to 0 and animate that. So now our light is going to fade down. And then it kind of turns out in the middle there. I mean, look at these still frames here. Let me just show you. That looks crazy. Look at that. I just want to walk in there and see what's there, you know? Oh, look at this. If we set the floor randomness to 0, that's so cool to get this like these squares. Because, I mean, it is like this square world, right? So it's so much more on theme with the design there. Yeah, I like that. One thing I feel like I should prepare you for when doing this effect is that when you're kind of moving around in the viewport, you're like, oh, that camera angle looks amazing. I should use that instead for the final render. And then you change the render to be that camera angle and you're like, wait, now I like this angle more. So I just think there's something about this shape that intrigues just change. I just want to see change. I think that's the thing with this shape. So don't be alarmed if you're never finding like the optimal camera angle, because I feel like there's almost a better angle, you know? It's like what's the best seating position? It's the next one, you know what I mean? Maybe this ground texture shouldn't be completely black, but just have some color on it. Yeah, okay, I think this is getting good. Let's try and do a still render and see. Okay, so let's go render image, just a still image. Hang on. Oh yeah. By the way, remember the cubes are also visible in the final render. So you have these cubes here. Those are incorrect. So you want to take the cubes collection here and you can disable in renders like this. So now you won't see these original cubes in the render. So now if you go render, view render, now you can see here is our render. If you set this render slot 2 and you go render image again, now we will be rendering to render slot 2 instead. So now we can compare these two renders by going slot 1, slot 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So here you can see we have the previous cubes, but this is the correct one. I think we want to have some glare on this, like some glow. Even though it doesn't look like it needs it, I think it does, because there's something about this just goes from white to black like that. I want to add some subtle glare. So let's set this to be the compositor, and then let's click use nodes. And here you can see you have this new dot here in Blender 4.5. It's pretty cool. And let's go Shift A and let's search for glare node, filter glare. I'm just going to place it in here, and I want to enable the compositor, set it to always. So now you can see the compositor here. And now let's change it from streaks to fog glow. And let's change it from medium to high. And on highlights, I want to set the threshold to 0. And then let's increase the size as well. And now we can lower the strength. And then you get this beautiful soft glare that is quite subtle. Okay, and then let's go Shift A and let's just search for lens distortion, because we want to add a subtle dispersion effect like this. So that's all the compositing we need. I don't think, yeah, it's just a really subtle glow setup. So let's just disable the compositor for now, because the fog glow is quite slow. By the way, one thing, if you go to the render properties and if you have motion blur enabled, you should set the position to be on the start of frame. When you have so much keyframes and so much like movement on each frame, there is something that happens with the motion blur that is a little bit weird. So if you set it to be on the start of frame, you will have a more natural motion blur with a simple audio visualizer extension. Look at this. Yeah, this is looking really cool. Okay, so it's time to bake our geometry node setup. So let's select our geometry nodes and let's head over to the editor type and let's set it to geometry nodes. And I want to enable this pin again. And now what you want to do, you want to go to the very end here and let's go to the first frame. And then let's go Shift A and let's search for bake. And then you want to set it to animation. And at this point, now you can set this greater than node to be how many duplicated versions you want. You can go absolutely crazy, but in my experience, it's kind of difficult to enjoy it when it gets more than 50, because you're just paying attention to what's happening at the beginning here anyways. So now we can bake our geometry node setup, so we will have a much more stable render. So I'm going to save my project file, and then I'm going to click bake. Okay, so this is going to take a few minutes. You should go get a cup of coffee or something, and I'll pause the recording and I'll get back when this is finished. Okay, so now the bake has finished and we have a much more responsive timeline. We can scrub back and forth and things will just work. So this will make a much more stable render. So you could probably have done this way earlier in the process, since we haven't really touched our geometry node setup in a while. Okay, so now we're ready to render this out as an animation. And what's really cool is that we already have added audio to our project file. So if we go to our video sequencer, here you can see we have our audio file. So now what we can do, we can go to the output properties and we can render it straight to video. This is a little bit crazy because we are using the beta version of Blender 4.5. So that means that if Blender crashes during the render and you're rendering as a video file, you will lose your entire render. But I like to live dangerously, so I'm going to show you how to export this straight to video. So let's set the file format to FFmpeg video, and then let's scroll down to encoding, and let's change the container from Matroska to MPEG-4. And then you can increase the quality, so let's set it to high quality. You can also do perceptually lossless if you want to. I'm going to do high quality. And then for your video file to have any audio, let's go to audio and audio codec, and you can set it to AAC. And then I also like to increase the bitrate to, for example, 256. And then I'm just going to set the output to be on my desktop, audio visualizer version 1, accept. And now for the render settings, I think I want to go for maybe 256 samples. Let's just do a still render and see. Let's set it to render slot 3 and advance 1 frame by pressing the right arrow key and then press F12 again. And then you can press 2 and 3 to compare these two. I think maybe this quality is okay. That is 2.5 to 3 seconds per frame. Yeah, so these are my settings when I'm rendering with the RTX 4090. But if you have a slower GPU, I can recommend that you lower the sample count even more. And then you can also set the resolution to 75%. Because it doesn't sound much, but let's compare these two. If you go to another render slot here. Look at this. This image looks only a little bit smaller. So here's the big one. Here's 75%. But the 75% render is actually half the amount of pixels. So it will render twice as fast. Sometimes it renders over twice as fast, especially if you're rendering to PNG, because of how the files are written. So yeah, if you're rendering with a slower computer, I highly recommend that you just set it to 75%, and then you can maybe use some sharpening or maybe even some AI upscaling to make it back to up to 100% afterwards. Yeah, so I'm going to set it back to 100%. I'm going to render it at 1920 by 1080p, 30 frames per second, 256 samples. And then I can also recommend under denoising, use the GPU for the denoising. That can really help speed things up. So that's it. I'm going to start the final render and I'll see you when it's finished. So I'm going to go render, render animation. Okay, so the render has finished. And if you thought it was a lot of fun to create audio visualizations like this, I feel like I should let you know that I do have a course on audio visualization where you get a much more powerful add-on, the Audio Visualizer Assistant. So the Audio Visualizer Masterclass is a course I made. I spent a lot of time on this, and there are so many cool techniques for doing audio visualizations in Blender. So there are many advanced scenes that are a ton of fun to make, and it's beginner friendly, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot. So please check out my course if you want to do more audio visualization. So that's it. If you watched this entire video, I appreciate that. I hope you're having a great summer wherever you are, and thanks for watching.